Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of KLF's Bhava Samvad. Today we'll be discussing Ravinder Kaurji's book, Brand New Nation. Now, this book is for those who seek a dispassionate disengagement between politics and policy. The two are intertwined in our country in ways that we can't tell what is politics and what is policy. This is also a book about those who seek critical thinking, who think about the country, who think about economics, who think about politics. It's also a fascinatingly literary book, littered with great lines, with wonderful sentences, and which are almost poetic in their description of policy, in their description of economics and politics. Welcome to the show, and I'd like you to say a few words to our viewers here and tell them a little bit about yourself, Ravinderji.
Thank you so much, first of all. And I think I'll begin by saying that I am a historian by training and a historian anthropologist. So, what I have tried to do in this book is to tell the story, of this newly reformed, unfolding India, or what is called the India growth story. So, this is the genealogy that I have been trying to trace.
Yes. Let's begin with Davos. Let's begin with the World Economic Forum. The first time I actually heard the phrase India growth story was somebody who had just returned from Davos, and who talked about that he wants to be part of the India growth story and not move abroad with his foreign degrees, and he wants to be part of this emerging new economy and emerging new country, which sort of gives impetus to entrepreneurship, to young leaders, to encourage people to work in the public sector and to be whether in advisory roles or whether in deeper roles, to pull the people who are essentially aspiring for lives abroad, bring them back to the grassroots, essentially a reversal of brain drain. Now I want to understand from you, where you talked about Davos as this a posh ski town where people are having these conversations around fireplaces about the country. How disconnected is the building of brand India from the reality of India and the, say, the tehsils of Uttar Pradesh or Madhya Pradesh or Rajasthan, or these states which are grappling with ground realities? What kind of disconnect do you see between these two stories that are unfolding at the same time parallelly?
So I think I'll begin by saying that perhaps people do not see it as a disconnection, really, in the sense that it is often positioned at the growth story as a
Yeah,
story of promise, that it is going
yeah,
to trickle down ultimately. It is going to uplift people from poverty. And that's the phrase often used. So, Davos, I should also add that often people don't understand what Davos is all about. World Economic Forum. Many people think that it is something to do with United Nations, some world body or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah,
But then you figure out that actually it is nothing to do with that. It's a private club
yeah,
of the Fortune 500 companies. So literally,
yeah,
it is what I call the captains of industry, or
yeah,
the billionaires of the world who get together with heads of states, and important people, influencers, people who shape trends as to how the world should evolve. So, in a way, I think the foray of India in that setting literally is, so it is deeply connected with these processes, right?
yeah,
So, I think growth story is about, not just, I mean, it is also about giving hope, optimism, and the moment that you are bringing up, it has been a very special moment in India's history, where everything was optimistic, people had hopes, and you're totally right that there has been, at some point there was a reverse trend that people didn't want to move abroad, or a lot of people from abroad were moving back in India, because it was seen that the lifestyle is changing. There are temptations, consumer temptations that you can dig into
yeah,
without
yes,
actually having to move away from your cultural setting. But that again is shifting. So in a way, what we are living through is that ups and downs,
yeah,
shifting landscape of that growth story.
yes. You've talked about how India is as it is imagined, India is no longer imagined as the dark container of overpopulation and deprivation, and it's now viewed as this, the destination for big investments to come in, and investments and economic opportunities, like you just said, because there's, you can tap into the consumer demand that has attracted a lot of, young Indians. Do you
Mm.
think? Do you think there is a certain reason behind the building of this kind of a brand, and how much of it was backed by data? Is what I want
Okay.
to understand.
Yes, as I think we must perhaps begin in the early 1990s because that is the
Yeah.
moment of economic reforms.
Yes.
And of course, reforms have a longer story than that, but 1990s is a turning point
Yeah.
because that was a point where a lot of people begin becoming very optimistic in a
Yeah.
little while.
Yeah.
And what is often forgotten is that it was, when we speak about structural adjustments or lowering trade tariffs. So something else started happening at that time also, which is to boost brand India. And
Okay.
it began with this thing that we need to boost the export market, that we need
Yeah.
made in India products should have value in the world.
Yes.
And that,
Yes.
as you know, is the foundation upon which later on you begin speaking about make in India. And there's a
Absolutely.
difference in this, that where you begin to reimagine the nation as an investment destination. And I think this is the question that I've been trying to look through. What does it mean for a country to reimagine itself as a place of production? Which,
Yeah.
and you can see in the language, you're totally
Yeah.
right that
Yeah.
in back, many years ago we used to speak about overpopulation, and there was family planning, control, and all those kind of things. But
Yeah.
then a change came, that we started speaking about population in terms of demographic dividend or the
Yes.
human capital, right? And you begin thinking about the cultural identity of the nation as a potential brand,
Hmm.
and thinking about that, all these, landscape, the territory can itself be mined into, like made productive. So I think this is the change, that besides economic structural
Yeah.
adjustments, it is
Yeah.
also a shift in how we imagine the nation.
Yes. You've talked about expert recommendations and cold statistics and the theater of persuasion. This was a question, this is a later question, but I somehow remember this line of yours. So, how is this a problem? Because cold statistics and expert
Mm,
recommendation, I mean, we have people say imagining the nation, and we have a sort of a political imagination that sort of gives, I mean, why shouldn't we imagine a better nation? Why shouldn't we imagine a make in India? It's going to encourage our country to maybe, syncs our country together, given that, India, as Alois has put it, there is nationalism without a nation as such. So it's sort of, we need something to hold us together, to motivate us, to propel us to move forward. But at the same time, do you think the systems that sort of bring this change or put this change into action are
mm,
ready for this kind of change? Or do you think they are trained? Do you think, like, for instance, if we have a very interesting, ambitious economic policy, we
mm,
have the infrastructure, we have the people, the personnel, the training to sort of implement these changes? Because
mm,
even for manufacturing, even to become a make in India hub, to
mm,
become a manufacturing hub that sort of, can compete with China, we need
mm,
to have a, solid investment, and solid investment in sort of a physical infrastructure which is lacking.
mm. You have actually raised many points in this, but let me pick up on one thing, that when we think about the economic sphere, we think in terms of statistics, charts,
Yeah.
graphs, right? What
Yeah.
I'm trying to do in my book is to pick up on images of a better life.
Yeah.
And in the last 30 years, you can see there is a whole avalanche. Like, there are so many images which have been created of an India which is not there, but which can be possible. And this is where
Yeah.
the earlier question of disconnection comes in, right? So
Yeah.
many of these pictures, for example, India Shining.
Yeah.
You remember it was heavily
Of course.
criticized.
Yeah. And
And
it
when people
failed.
said
Yeah.
that there is a disconnection, and
Yeah.
what I'm trying to also argue is that, look, this is not about, this is also about creating a new imagination of a better life,
Absolutely.
right? But then
Yeah.
comes your second part, what you're bringing in about investments.
Yeah.
Is the nation ready to actually do that?
Yeah.
Emotions play a huge role.
Absolutely.
in
Absolutely.
uplifting that sentiment, and hope and optimism was very much there some years ago. And I think that part has started moving in a different direction. But I think more important is that in all these years of growth, because India has seen growth at a certain point, what has not happened is social investments. So, by social investments, what I mean is investments in education, in health infrastructures. So when we think about infrastructures, we just think about flyovers, airports,
Absolutely.
ports, and those kind of things. So what you
Absolutely.
forget is that you have this huge so-called demographic dividend, but it can
Yeah.
only be made productive if there were also a better standard of living,
Yeah.
better infrastructure. So I think this is where I would say India has
Yeah.
been a little bit different from China, because China did massive social investment in early stages of its growth.
Yes. Uh, in the initial part of your book, you've talked about this need to celebrate itself, this new urge to celebrate our country, our identity, and you also talked about this being at odds with democracy, because democracy is obviously about questioning what is
Mm,
wrong and dissent, which is
mm,
critical, which plays a pivotal role. Now, the argument to this is that if we keep putting out sort of bad news, then we
mm,
are denting the image of the nation in front of the world, on
mm,
the global stage. Now, this is something which is an absolutely new insertion into
mm,
the India narrative, into the way the media narrative. Let me put it like that. So I want to understand now. We've just seen the COVID second wave, and we've seen our cities completely burnt, destroyed, with people dying on the streets. And
mm,
I
mm.
don't think India has ever seen this kind of
No.
death the way after partition. And partition was only a particular region, and then communal outbursts in some states. It wasn't even something that affected the entire country as such. So COVID has been a big setback for the nation. So, do you think we need to rethink the way we are projecting? What are we telling ourselves?
Mm, mm. Uh, and that's a
Are we feeding
tremendous
ourselves lies? Do you think?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I
If
think
you can just draw the fault line.
yeah, I mean, in the sense that it doesn't have to be this way, because
Yeah.
there are many different models of how
Yeah.
countries, with
Yeah.
free markets, they operate, and the usual notion that
Yeah.
democracy, liberal democracy,
Yeah.
and liberal markets go here, right?
Yeah.
And I think here, what it has been somehow misinterpreted, this notion that that we need to continue drumming up good news all the time. And I think it
Absolutely.
was pretty, stunning that during COVID, the recent wave in May, June, there was actually a move to create this hashtag positivity, where people were encouraged to tell positive stories, and there
Yeah.
was nothing much positive to talk about at that time,
Yeah.
you know. But I think this is where it becomes problematic. It's a collision, because democracy, as you have rightly pointed out, the essence of democracy is dissent, that we
Yeah.
question. And I think this is what something India has always been very proud of, that it has been part of that identity making, right, that we are
Yeah.
democratic. And we may be lagging in some things, but then there is always this thing that we have this freedom, unending freedoms of speech, and newspapers are always critical. But then, as you can see, somehow with that growth imperative, which is also, I
Yeah.
think, a because there are perfectly, countries which are growing, and economically, and they have better
Yeah.
lifestyles, and they are equally democratic. But this is, a particular feature of the contemporary nation.
Yeah.
This search for
Yeah.
unending good news all the time.
Yeah. It also has something to do with our brand of nationalism now.
Yeah.
Because I know perfectly, well educated people even around me who believe, okay, why should I keep looking at bad news? Why should I keep looking at people who are critical for no reason? Why should I keep looking at, so they've, it's sort of, the narrative now is that, we want to only constructively criticize in a way that we don't sort of speak out against any establishment, like the establishment or the state. So this is something which is put in the minds of even perfectly educated people, You think this sort of damages, this sort of does a disservice to democracy and to the role the media plays?
Yeah, but this is so stunning. This change is pretty new in a way because, as I am showing in my book,
Yeah,
exactly in that chapter on Davos, that
yeah,
in this debate which is taking place, where captains of the industry are sitting and talking, and they are actually
yeah,
criticizing the prime minister, then
yeah,
prime minister. This is in 2012, and
yeah,
the minister of commerce is just a few feet away,
yeah,
and people are doing this. This idea that you should not criticize does not, exist,
yeah,
because people feel that it is their nationalist duty to put the nation on the right path, which they thought at that time was not doing
yeah,
well, and actually India was doing pretty well.
yeah,
You see, so there is this disconcerting
absolutely. Yeah,
tension here, right? So I
yeah,
think this thing that and I think it's pretty stunning that this change has taken place, where critique
yeah,
is taken as something which puts you in the bracket of anti-national. Now, the funny
yeah,
thing is, it's an English term, anti-national, and I think sometimes when it is put in foreign context, people get like, "What
yeah.
does it even mean?" Because it makes
Yeah.
no
I mean, they don't.
sense.
They even anti-incumbency for that matter is an absolute Indian creation. The term anti-incumbency, I
Yeah,
haven't heard it in any other context aside from Indian politics.
yeah. So I just think this is a little bit like the whole emergence of an English term called anti-national. It deserves
Yeah,
some sort of attention, like the origin
yeah,
of this, because it makes absolutely no sense. Because at the heart of it is
yeah,
that people
yeah,
are dissenting and they critique and they are not in agreement with the
yeah.
government.
You have an interesting quote in the book where you said, who are the chosen people who inhabit the visual surface of the nation brand? Which cultural practices and ideas are left out of the frame, concealed from the eyes of the world? This reminds me of a time when I was reporting from Bhavana, which is a little satellite town
Yes.
on the borders of Delhi, and it's essentially a rehabilitation cluster there. And one woman had said, like, because we are poor, they've thrown us here in the borders, and if you can't see something doesn't mean that thing doesn't exist.
Hmm.
So this is a lot of where we project our country as this perfect nation, and we have perfectly beautifully big roads and big flyovers and big buildings. Especially if you see the way the cities are designed, the road leading from the airport to going to the cities generally is a neat stretch and all of that, and then you have the clusters are hidden away. So, do you think one of the reasons why we are doing this, concealing our reality to a fault, is because we are playing around with our data,
Hmm.
and we are not being true to data in this country? Do you think
Yes.
that is one of the reasons?
I think it's twofold. One thing is that there have been recent a lot of attention to data, that how
Yeah,
data is being, like central statistical organization,
yeah,
which has a duty to actually tell us,
yeah,
the state of the nation. Often, the data is delayed or the formula is changed. I mean, these are some things that I'm mentioning in my book as well. That how there has been a
yeah,
massive contestation about growth rate, how
absolutely.
the formula was changed, backdated, all sorts of things. So I think, and that is where I think I'm calling GDP the magic number, because no one really understands, common people
Yeah,
who are not economists,
yeah,
what exactly GDP is and how it
mm,
is calculated. But
yeah,
everyone talks about 5%,
GDP. Yeah.
4% going up or down. So I think,
Yeah.
in a way, so therefore there is
That's
so
also
much.
that's also to do with the political
uh,
how GDP is often quoted and becomes part of the political rhetoric.
exactly. So that
Like
that that
isn't that true of all things discussed these days? Take the farmer laws, for instance.
Mm,
Everyone has an opinion, but
mm.
nobody knows what's going on. So
No,
it's extremely like in a polarized society, which is driven by social media. You're more like there's a pressure on you to come up with an opinion each day, but there's really no time to read.
no, but I think this is especially for statistics, because people see this as a very specialized area, and
Yeah,
they take it at their word. And there is so much. I mean, and these are not perfect things. These are calculations, and they can be
yeah,
changed
yeah,
all the time. And same, I would say, for rankings like ease of doing business. Is Has India jumped 50 steps, or things like that. So then they become spectacular news to be celebrated, right?
Yes.
So I think there is a lot of celebratory good news aspect to connected to this number. But just going back to the image that you were mentioning about bhavana or poverty, I think it some of it is unintended, like the effects that we are talking about. That
Yeah.
people who create these images, they may not necessarily have thought about that.
Hmm.
That of course, all of us, when we want to present ourselves in the public, let's say on social media, we put our best pictures, we of
Yeah.
what we think are the best pictures, right?
Hmm.
So the way I've been looking at these imagery is that imagine the nation taking a selfie, a collective, large collective selfie, and showing to the world that this is who we are, because this is how you want to be seen, not because this is who you are, but this is how you would like the world to see you.
Hmm.
And I think this is where the problem or unintended consequences begin,
Hmm.
meaning that who are the people who can
Yeah.
inhabit that visual surface,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And who are always seen as an embarrassment, who have to be edged out.
Yeah.
And this is where, all those questions about poverty, slums, unbecoming images that we don't want to be associated with.
Absolutely.
And this has an effect in the sense that these people are always seen, poor people are seen as a burden on the society. So it has the imagery that we are talking about, it
Yeah.
actually is closely aligned with also how the social attitudes are towards people who are on the margins. So in
Yeah.
this way, these images that we are, using as a platform to analyze, I mean, they are not just figments,
Yeah.
they literally allow us to see the infrastructures of inequality.
Yes. You mentioned your background in history right in the beginning of the conversation. There's a point about that you've made about partition refugees, where that background actually reflects. Very interesting point. You've talked about the hierarchical distinction between self-reliant and self-dependent citizens.
Yes.
Was
Yes.
already evident in the very formative movement of the Indian nation state when partition refugees had to be resettled in the late 1940s.
Mhm.
Now, previous discourses of self-reliance are usually forgotten. So this is
Ha.
one thing we do when we talk about the economy.
Mhm.
We had a certain concept of something in the past, but
Mhm.
we sort of ignored it in our, and we have a brand new understanding of something. Now, the
Mhm.
word brand new doesn't always make sense because things need to be understood within a historical context as well. So, if you could just explain that aspect and how we go wrong there.
I think one thing is that also with a lot of scholarly analysis that
Yeah.
the term neoliberalism is
Yes.
often used as an explanation for everything. it
Yeah.
it almost is like neoliberalism came and certain things happened, and by precisely pointing out that 1940s or the attitudes as to how to
Yeah.
deal with people who do not have, people who are at the mercy,
Hmm.
refugees precisely were
Yeah.
at that point. And all, because my previous work is on partition of India, so
Yeah.
what I could see in the resettlement policy was literally that the ideal refugee was the self-made man. Even women were seen as dependent or a burden on the society or the burden on the government, right?
Yeah.
But whereas the able-bodied masculine, self, that was the ideal type, that who was ready to be the citizen of the new nation, right? So these are ingrained attitudes in the society, where I think another point you could mention is that in India, philanthropy, like where you actually give or share what you have, right,
Yeah.
is actually not very widespread. But what we do in terms of charity, it often is in terms of religious dispensations, or we tend to give more within the community, people that we know. So the notion that you would also give something to people you do not know, people who are complete strangers, is less when you compare.
Yeah.
So I think this is where I think we need to understand that it is not just neoliberalism, but neoliberalism was very happily, or the market came to be adopted very naturally in India, and this sounds like pretty contradictory, because the discourse always is that globalization came from outside, but
Yeah.
the thing is that Indian elite actually took to it, Indian middle class took to it pretty nicely.
Yes. uh, you've talked about this uh, Hindutva politics,
Hmm?
and how Hindutva politics is now, it's absolutely central to the way our economy, politics, everything runs in our country. Religion is taking center stage everywhere in most countries. That is the trend. And say take Pakistan for example. Now, do you think that I mean, it's also India wasn't it was a mix of not just Hindutva politics, but we had a very tall leader in the prime minister. We had a whole cadre that sort of worked very hard on ground to sort of put these ideologies at the forefront, and India has wholeheartedly accepted this. The majority has accepted it, and it's a thumping mandate. And I don't believe the elections were rigged, but and I do believe that there was extreme support, and there probably still is, for this particular government, for this particular leadership. So, do you think that the sort of uh, the liberals who've
Hmm.
now taken to these different political views, they're fair in what in their judgment, because there really isn't any alternative that they see?
Well, this is a huge question because, like, I'm not, I'm not sure I can answer this. Because this is a lot. But I think maybe what we can say is
Yeah,
that indeed, the contradictory thing which has taken place in Indian politics is
yeah,
that globalization or global capital or the so-called sweep of modernity, which was taking place, that has not leveled out ethnic
yeah,
identities. Rather, they have been enforced.
yeah,
And I think this is like this has not just in India, but that is a wider phenomena that we were all told that once free market, the end of history. Like now we are in this global age, everything is superfluous. We
yeah,
have seen, this ethnic democracies getting sharpened, right?
yes,
And many political analysts, they get completely like stunned. Oh, but where does, what happened? So globalization is falling apart, and now we are in the age of populism, majoritarianism. Well, what I'm trying to show in my book is it is not a complete surprise, because these are
yeah, absolutely,
phenomena which has been, taking place, and it has simply been overlooked,
yeah,
right? That it has strengthened ethnic identities. And this is where the question of branding, which seems like a superfluous thing at first sight, right? But it has an enormous impact on who inhabits the visual image, the selfie of the nation
absolutely,
which is presented, and who also owns the resources which can be capitalized, monetized, turned into growth.
absolutely,
So I think this is where we need to be attentive, that when we speak about economic growth, it is not just a free lunch. It also comes back with ideological, and here the thing is that history is never predetermined. It does not have a set path, and it did not have to turn like this, but it did turn like this. And the reason is pretty clear, that BJP in early 1990s, as is well known, economic issues were not on the forefront. When if you Google
absolutely,
core issues BJP, just see what comes out. These are not the things which will come out automatically, right? Because it has to do with the temple issue, or Article 370, or it has a different nature altogether. But the shift came, when the investment
yeah,
model was adopted. So I think Gujarat, for example, is would be one of the first examples. When
yeah,
Vibrant Gujarat is offered in
absolutely,
2003, and suddenly middle class people who love growth, they started
yeah,
shifting. So I think this is where we need to be attentive to the cultural nationalism and the
yes,
growth, that how
yes.
they can come together in unlikely ways as well.
Absolutely. So there was a growth story there, which was not just sold to a great extent; it was true as well. There was considerable growth to be proud of, and when there's no other alternative that you see, and no other leader or party is able to offer you that promise, you are going to take what's available to you. And another thing that I feel is that there was a lot of fatigue that was set in, like that had set in with negative politics, and no other leader had come forward and talked about India positively. Or maybe say in imagination, in say in the recent history, it was not documented. when previous prime ministers or previous leaders talked about India, it was always a very, there was certain, sense of lethargy, there was certain sense of pessimism, there was certain sense of depression. But when you talk about India, and especially the majority community, in a good light, in a celebratory way, I think that is what people embraced happily. Even, former, I mean, this country was essentially full of, majority of them were Congress supporters. But then as it played out, they all turned into BJP supporters. Hence the big majority. It was also the fatigue that had, just set in, that, we're a nation where, sort of the majority is blamed, or we're a nation that doesn't celebrate its culture, we're a nation that, shies away from. So there's a lot of like political,
Hmm.
whole host of, complicated problems of identity politics and Muslim appeasement and all
Hmm.
of those things which were in the past, that sort of played a very big role in, sort of making the middle class Indian absolutely disassociated with the Congress way and then attracted to the BJP way. And it happened in most households, hence the numbers, of the election numbers that we saw. Now, building a brand is one aspect, and sustaining it is quite another. So, do you think that, we've built a brand India, and we've sold a brand India, and we believe there is a brand India, but the structure that sustains it, do you think that is, I mean, it is in the imagery of the brand, or is it in the way the image is being fleshed in? Where is the fault line?
Say it again with the last part.
I'm saying that is it in the imagery of the brand, or the way in this image is being fleshed in?
Hmm.
The brand India, where do you think the fault line is? Sustaining brand India, or the way brand India has been shaped?
I think, of course, it goes both ways. I mean, it's a process which has been unfolding, and I think, just to get back with, with this ideological part that you were talking
Yeah,
about, it's not like that Congress has not been, super nationalist, because all you have to do is to go back to the archives of 1980s, 1990s,
absolutely,
and what you
absolutely.
see is that, Congress, had that kind of dominating position that BJP has today. And
Absolutely.
we actually forget
Yes.
that, Rajiv Gandhi had the largest majority ever in terms
Yes.
of parliamentary seats. So
Absolutely.
I'm just saying this to put that in perspective, that often people
Yeah.
say, no, but it wasn't like this. And here, the contradiction in some of this is that, the middle class was
Yeah.
actually doing pretty well. It had started, if all you have to do is to go back and look at the growth chart and the kind of
Yeah.
investments or, capital formation which is taking place in India, right? But the thing is that, the sense of anxiety that was there, it was that we are not growing fast enough. Because if you just
Yeah.
scroll back into 2011, 2010, 2009, there was this movement called, first there was this movement called India Poised, that India is ready to fly off.
Yeah.
And then there was this movement called Lead India, where it was felt that India
Yeah.
needs to be led in a stronger way, because the growth was actually doing so well that it had created more ambition.
Yeah.
And that ambition was not being fulfilled fast enough. You see? And this is where the shift comes, where, the promise of good times, Achhe Din, comes in to say, now everything is going to be put on fast forward mode,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And just to say something about the Gujarat model, Gujarat historically has been a
Absolutely.
maritime trading state.
Yeah.
Historically, like hundreds of years, we are talking about.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
has a very well established trading community,
Yes.
so that Gujarat was already doing pretty well all those years. So what is
I think
called
more than the Gujarat model as such, it was the energy. Because you need, like, for instance, leaders like Chandrababu Naidu, leaders like, even, for instance, Arvind Kejriwal, leaders like, Narendra Modi when he was chief minister. These sort of, they were regional leaders. I mean, Narendra Modi now
yes.
is the prime minister, but leaders who talk about development, leaders who talk about new policies, leaders who talk about entrepreneurship, were not exactly seen in the long history of Congress leadership. The way the Congress was sort of falling apart, and the way there was lethargy, the way there was less outreach from the side of the government. So all this really like added infused new energy in people, that look, there are new ideas that are coming in. I mean, the models as such, Chandrababu's Naidu's model or Narendra Modi's model in Gujarat, there may be several flaws in it, but if you look at it from the perspective of a middle class Indian who's going about their daily lives, it's something that gives you new energy. Oh, this person is talking about investment. This person is talking about professionalization. This person is talking about capacity building, which are sort of terms which sort of these state governments had never really seen. So or never really documented, even if they were happening. It was not documented and put into public imagination like ever. So it gave people a new sense of energy, and that is what attracted a lot of people. And it continues to do so. I mean, if your leaders are engaging with experts, and they're engaging with experts from civil society, which is now a trend. And I know that for a fact that the central government and both the government in Delhi are both adopting a model like this. For instance, lateral entry is now a thing where bureaucrats, where people outsiders are coming into the system, and they're bringing in their expertise. And now they've also started acknowledging that there are flaws within our bureaucracy. That our bureaucracy lacks training, it lacks sort of, because ultimately who's implementing your policies? The bureaucrat is implementing it, and the bureaucrat is the training you get in the academy in Masuri is how to eat with a fork and a knife, among other, and on horse riding, among other whatever training. But it's something that they've realized, which is a good precedent, I would say, that going forward, at least we've realized that these are our flaws and this is what we need to work on.
So, but I think this is the language, which came with the economic reforms, which is the
Yes.
language of, enterprise, innovation,
Yeah.
growth, because those were not the terms which were used before that. Even though I must say that in 1980s, the arrival of computers that had already
Absolutely.
set the tone, right? For
Yes.
instance. So I think, and you're totally right, that this model, economic reforms and the fact that you can, do investment or special economic zones and this and that, that began filtering to the states as well. And I think Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, I think
Yes.
the southern states were, and this whole thing, Infosys, the company, or the fact that
Absolutely.
Bangalore becomes, the Silicon Valley, so
Yes.
so that this is not centralized, and it was very at a federal level, right? States
Yeah.
are doing that. Actually, Orissa has its own branding investment program also. All
Yeah.
states have these days. So this is something which started from 1990s onwards, right? So you're totally right about that. So I think here the whole thing that we are talking about is that how do you mobilize all that into mass politics? And this is where mediatized imagery plays an outsized role. Publicity, that how do you make sure that the message continues to go to the public? And this is where I think Narendra Modi has been very successful,
Yeah.
that people started talking about Gujarat model, as a unique thing, right? That was, people often used to speak about the report card, if you recall, that
Yeah.
this is the report card, and now we will implement this model. And I think you can see that this is something similar is being drummed up in Uttar Pradesh right now, that
Yeah.
UP is being, mobilized as this place which is the growth story. But as everyone knows, Gujarat and UP have a very different history and very different socio-demographic or socio-economic profile, right? So
Yeah.
what could work in Gujarat, given its prior solid history of trading, you know, Uttar Pradesh is different. But nevertheless, it is this model where you
Yeah.
combine, investments, the promise of investment. I think there is this whole thing that around Noida, there is a huge hub coming up, or at
Yeah.
least that's the plan I have read, right?
Yes.
And then you combine
And
that.
Noida itself is a huge hub of so many things, offices,
But
residential
yes,
complexes, everything.
and
So
I
it's
think
also essentially, it's also the fact that we borrow a lot of terms, and
mm,
then there is a sort of universal, you sort of universally use those terms for like all states and all programs, and that does a disservice to the diversity, the social complexity, and the way our society is stratified. So these are not terms which are sort of homegrown. These are terms that have been borrowed from a very Western, like sort of global world, and then we're trying to adopt them. That's essentially what you're trying to say. That maybe one term or one sort of concept will work for one state, but won't really work for another state because there are other problems and there's a certain history and there's not a certain inclination towards business or entrepreneurship that comes naturally to the people.
So, but what you can see is that in politics, this has become the formula. That
Yeah,
formula that you can implement. That on one hand, you cater to hardcore cultural nationalist issues,
yeah,
right? That you say in this case you would in UP's case that you would promise that we are promoting Hindutva on one hand, and on the other hand we say all right, we will also bring green climate energy politics, or we will set up XYZ tech hub, which sounds really fancy, right? So I think it
yeah,
is this is being offered, and as I said, history is never predetermined. It is full of surprises, twists, and turns, right? But what we have to be mindful of is to never separate these things in our analysis.
yeah,
It often people say no, but it's a diversion. Cultural nationalism is a diversion, or Hindutva is a diversion, or that
yeah,
the real thing is economy. But then you have to say no. Actually, the only reason that this cultural nationalism has come to the center stage is on the back of economy, right? So I
yeah,
mean the alignment of these two things
yeah.
constantly has to be kept in mind.
Absolutely. I mean, cultural nationalism is now a need. It's part of the Indian identity, which can't be denied. And you don't like feel it so much when you're living in cities and when you're driving around in say Lutyens or in like zones which have all access to all facilities and you have access to books and everything. But it's more of you as you go deeper into villages and tehsils and like deep districts that are struggling to survive in so many spaces. You see, cultural nationalism gives them a deep sense of identity which cannot be denied, and there is a certain reason why they will want to back it. So and it's not like cultural nationalism in this case is only cultural nationalism. It also comes with the promise of we will fix your education, we will give you better jobs. For instance, like for instance right now, UP's newest, I think that's going to be Yogi Adityanath's election agenda is the fact that he has given more jobs than other chief ministers, and that's a race that each state has some issue or the other. That's his, I think that's going to be his big election sort of game plan. It's going to be centered around jobs. But going forward, the way China like projects itself. Earlier, McDonald's would go where MacArthur would open up. It was always the coca colonization and the consumption, and the corporates would move where the military sets its base. Now the way China moves forward is with it's not the sword but the money bag. So you get countries into a debt trap, and then you sort of acquire territory in those countries, and that's something that they've done with Sri Lanka as well, and like sort of going and controlling certain ports in Sri Lanka. So do you think this is going to play out in a big way? Because now China is a big, not just a financial competitor, but a big political threat to our, when we seal our borders and we view BJP, Congress, and everything as our people, we are actually against China here. And China has been infiltrating our borders, even though this current government has tried to seal those borders. It's a big threat. So, how do you think the Indian identity is going to now, or the nation's identity is going to be threatened by China going forward in the next, coming years, the next decade?
Yeah, I think first of all, I would say that I think it has been a mixed bag. The China, strategy that you were speaking about, debt
Yeah,
trap, and all those things. I think from the outside, China seems like pretty, like totally in control of the situation. But actually, when you begin looking in Southeast Asia, or in the African context, or even Sri Lanka, by the way, or Nepal, or here and there, what you do see is that there is a lot of contestations of these kind of policies as well. So, for example, I'm now, I think it is Malaysia, if I remember correctly, which has actually stalled some of the efforts of Chinese projects. So I'm just noting this just to say that that it is not as 100% certain, all these belt and road projects, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But coming back to the India-China relationship, first of all, I think it had started deteriorating long before.
Absolutely.
But in those days, it was seen like, I'm going back many years now. I think it was Oscar Fernandez who first time said that China is a real threat, not Pakistan, because in those days, India-Pakistan, rivalry, competition, whatever, hostility, that used to be the main story, right?
Yes.
But then all of this started shifting as India's growth story begins, then people started talking less and less of Pakistan. It was no longer
Yeah.
India Pakistan, but then it became India China as part of this growing Asian century story,
Yeah.
right? And I think this is where the shift comes. But I think in the last couple of years, like 3-4 years, I think that has been shifting again. That Pakistan again came to play a bigger role in Indian politics. With Balakot and all those recently in the last few years. But Pakistan has also changed in the meantime,
Yeah.
given that China has actually become, quite a strong player within Pakistan as well. So I think in a way, I mean, it's not like we are going to have a massive foreign policy
Yeah.
discussion, but just to say that South Asia or the region is changing, right? But nothing is said, of course, because China is also hedged. And I think I think I should mention the Indo-Pacific, the strategy, which is to
Yeah.
hedge China. I mean, that is also taking place. But like all of this these are developments which are taking place. Of course, let's see where it goes.
Yes. Your conclusion that, and I quote, the paradox of the brand nation is that economic downturn does not necessarily lead to weakening of political leadership. It potentially even strengthens it. I think this is such a profound assessment of the reality of the day. So are we in a situation where as long as the Pied Piper's tune is pleasant to the crowd, they stay charmed?
Well, I think the paradox that I'm trying to understand is something that a lot of people continue to ask.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure everyone has, or even I have an answer to that, because the way we assess politics is that if a leader or a political party has not delivered what they promised, then they would be voted out, because this is what we are told democracy is all about, right? And in 1990s, it was, I think, one of the Clinton advisors who said, it's the economy, stupid. That if economy is not in order, or in order, then people can be voted in and out. But what we see here is that Indian economy is actually not doing that well,
Yeah.
right? And during Corona also, India has been more hard hit than many other countries.
Yeah.
And I think that downturn that we are talking about, it had already started, before Corona.
Yeah.
So here comes the question, the paradox. So the good times, they have been delayed, but there is this
Yeah.
promise which continues. And then somebody will ask, but how long should people wait? Well, I don't know. And I think this is something which is not that easy to explain in purely material economic terms, because
Absolutely. It's
this is
also,
where,
yeah, it's also because India is not to blame overpopulation, and that's always been the favorite sort of term which is thrown in by every politicians, especially in the case of COVID. It's also the way in which the Indian psyche behaves to, like, there was a fatigue from the first wave, so there's a lot of, like, you would go to a marriage and find people without masks in a room, say about 50 or people, 100 people. So the attitude towards disease and life and like death is something that has shaped the the swings, the waves of the pandemic in a deep way.
hmm,
There's an attitude of carelessness also in our cities, in the way we have approached the pandemic and interacted with it. So that is something that is played a big role in of course COVID. But obviously the management of COVID, whether it's from the center or the state, it reflects a great deal of incompetence.
I think COVID in a way has been a revelation, because
Yes.
it is happening all over the world. So
Yeah.
it gives you at once a comparative frame,
Yeah.
which otherwise you would not be, because the same thing happening everywhere, and you can see how divergent the approaches of different governments have been. And I think this is where I think it has been very surprising. The I think already in January this year there was I think that the statement was made that we have won victory over COVID. So there was a celebratory aspect to it. I think it was a speech at Davos at the World Economic Forum,
Yeah.
and it was
I guess
basically like,
that's because when there wasn't any wave, and in fact in January there were no cases of COVID, and this was the message that even the scientific advisors of the government and people who actually advise the government on subjects of science and medicine and infectious diseases, they themselves had come out and said there is sort of, I mean, largely that was what was projected, that their assessment was that the COVID is finally over.
mm,
And the reason for the second wave was more the Delta variant, not
mm,
so much COVID. If there was no Delta variant, there wouldn't have been like a second wave.
mm,
So the justification that multiple governments, not just the center, even state governments came out with was that, look, if there was no Delta variant, there wouldn't have been a second wave. So it's
mm,
something that sort of took us by surprise. And because we happen to be
mm,
a country of large numbers,
mm,
we are obviously less prepared than, and we have problems of poverty. We have problems of, like, we have not focused on decentralized healthcare in, so many, 75 years of independence. We don't have a focus on healthcare. It has never been there. And, like, I mean, we have built hospitals, in some big hospitals in some big places, but no good quality standardized healthcare that's affordable and accessible to poor people, which is what sort of, which is what we paid a huge price for.
mm. No, I think
A whole
that is
host of
right.
reasons.
But just to say that the history of pandemics
Yeah.
shows that pandemics just don't come and go. I mean, they stay around for a while, and the problem is precisely because it's a living organism, it continues to mutate, which is
Yes.
why I think there has been a lot of caution and people are prepared. And I think letting the guard down has been, because I can just see that, you can just see everywhere how different that attitude has been. So I think here maybe we should go back to the crux of the matter, namely
Yeah.
that how badly one has been looking for every event which can be celebrated,
Yeah.
right? Like, so that we can say no, but now
This
we need
again, brings us to that need for
to
celebration, that need for happiness, that need for optimism, which we
yes,
lack. I mean, in a
yes,
country where you're sweating like 20 hours a day and you're coming home to less food and problems and poverty, somebody is telling you that, look, it'll get better. You obviously want to hug that person.
yes. So
So it's a narrative where,
whereas in a pandemic, you need to be cautious. You need to be,
absolutely,
because like most governments have been like little bit, you know, because they are
yeah,
so afraid of, when the death toll rises, then democratic governments are really under pressure. So I think
yeah,
this is where the whole, the logic of politics on which everything happens continuously. It is propelled by this need for constant production of good news, that
yeah,
we can congratulate, we can say something, whereas a nation sometimes needs to introspect. Things are
yeah,
going wrong, accept it, and it's only then you can go forward. So I think this is where, you know democracy or
yes.
dissenters must not be pushed away. Dissenters must be welcomed, because they are the ones who are literally saying no, 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 things are not going well.
Yes. I also feel dissenters and people who are pro government in that sense need to be on one page. The discussion cannot be so polarized that you're not talking to each other, you're talking at each other. So which is why some of our debates in whether it's the debates in parliament or debates on prime time it's as if two people are speaking two different languages, at
Hmm.
the cost of the nation, at the cost of the janta, at the cost of the people who expect better from both the sides.
Hmm. Yeah, sure,
I guess
the debate is
it's also
certainly very
that.
polarized.
I guess it's also that. So it's this was a wonderful discussion, and I loved reading your book. I loved the so many points that you've made, and you've made them. It's eloquent. It's beautiful. It reminded me a lot of Shashi Tharoor for some reason. Uh, you must give him a copy. He will surely love the book, and it's something that, I also thank ELF that, they keep bringing me onto this platform again and again and then, and that sort of keeps me sort of reading all these new books that are being written on the economy and politics. And anyway, thank you so much. In case someone has a question, we can wrap up. Just before we wrap up, we can just take one or two questions. The organizers can just flash them on the screen for us. If anyone has a question on Brand India, okay, there's insightful discussion thanks to the organizers. So there's a lot of beautiful audience from Odisha that tunes in all the time. And an insightful discussion. This is all praise for you and your
Thank
brand
you,
book.
I think, for asking. And I actually would like to thank you for such a close reading of the book. It's actually quite an honor that you have read it so thoroughly.
Oh, I,
Uh,
I, I thoroughly love the book, and I've also highlighted a lot of portions.
yeah.
It's a good reference book as well, actually. The
Thank you
way you
so
put it out.
much.
Any other questions, organizers? Can you flash any other questions, comments? All right, let's wrap it here. Thank you, Ravinder Kaurji, for doing this with us, and stay in touch and enjoy Copenhagen. I hope you're vaccinated, and I hope
Yes.
things get better. And I hope
And
you're able to
Pallavi,
fly back to India as soon as borders open up and things are up and running again. And let's believe in the India growth story, and let's be optimistic. We can keep criticizing and we can keep being critical of so many things and so many people, but let's also be optimistic because this is where we belong.
thank you so much. And I
Thank you
want to
so
wish you
much.
best of luck for your own book.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anuj.
Look
Thanks.
forward.
Look
Okay.
forward.
Bye.
Bye bye.